If you're like me and you think car makers are getting a bit carried away with the amount of excess chrome and flashy looks that a lot of cars have nowadays, and you want more of a stealthy look, then this Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross behind me might just be the car for you. That's because this is the Black Edition, or more specifically the LS Black Edition. And that might seem like a bit of a funny name, given that the car behind me is very much white in color. However, I promise it'll make more sense later on. Now, Mitsubishi has been rolling out a few of these Black Editions, first with the Outlander and now with the Eclipse Cross. And essentially what it does is it takes the affordable LS grade and adds a few choice extras, like heated seats and nicer interior trim to make it more attractive. Now, bundle all that in a small SUV, which isn't all that small on the inside, and you've actually got yourself a pretty enticing proposition. Especially when you consider that the car behind me is just over $35,000 before on-road costs, putting it about level with a base model Subaru Crosstrek or Skoda Kamiq. Now, the Eclipse Cross is still a very popular car in Australia. However, it is getting on in years. It first came out in 2017, which is a surprisingly long time ago. And although it did see a pretty significant facelift in 2020, it's 2023 now, and there are a lot of aspects of this car that are starting to fall behind its many, many rivals. So in 2023, is Mitsubishi's upper large small SUV still something you should consider? Well, today we're going to find that out. So what makes this car the Black Edition? Well, first and foremost, this is an appearance package car, and that means they've made a number of small changes to give this a more stealthy look. So for example, we've got a gloss black front and rear skid plate, we've got gloss black mirrors and gloss black 18-inch wheels. They've also deleted the roof rails on this model to give it a little bit more of a sleeker look, I suppose. Personally, I'd prefer the roof rails just so it gives you that option to put on roof racks later on. So as I said before, this car is of course white. You can also go for a red. Those are both $200 extra, but if you want to go for the full black treatment or even a gray, those are no cost options. So that is another way you can save a little bit of money. So moving down the side here, we have a pretty lengthy wheelbase here. It's 2,670 mils, which is interestingly the same wheelbase length as a Subaru Crosstrek. And it means that this sits on the upper end of a small SUV, and that really does pay dividends inside. Another attractive feature of this is the sloping rear roof angle, which has become increasingly popular in SUVs nowadays. And as we'll talk about later on, it doesn't actually have all that much compromise on the boot area, despite having that extra design flair. But that's enough about the exterior, let's jump inside. In the interior now, let's first talk about what you get in the Black Edition that you don't get in the LS. First, that starts with the combination of synthetic suede and synthetic leather that we've got here over a traditional cloth style seat. You also get heated seats, which is a real nice one, I think. You've got two-stage here and you've got the old school style switches, which I find to be a bit of an advantage because in those winter months where it's just going to be cold day after day, you can just leave it on eternally. You don't have to faff about with some touchscreen or a button every single time you get in the car. So, you know, those little wins. You also have some more black touches around the air vents and the center console here and things like that. However, as a whole, this interior remains pretty familiar to what we've seen for a number of years. You've got these durable, if not the nicest materials in the world. They're a little bit forgiving, but they're overall pretty hard, though you do have some nice squishy surfaces here on the armrest on either side of the driver and passenger here in the center, which is quite nice, I think. It allows you to sort of settle in. Speaking of settling in, let's talk about the seat. So it's actually got a pretty good, nice high driving position here. You've got a good amount of visibility, though that bonnet is definitely a lot more in your view than some of its rivals. It makes it feel like a much larger car. It's actually pretty comfortable as well. On this Black Edition, you do get four-way adjustability. However, the more I looked over this cabin, the more it does start to feel dated. First of all, this touchscreen is too small. It's 8 inches, which isn't the smallest in the world. However, it's considering how far away and up top it is, it's a little bit difficult to reach and it's a bit imprecise when you use it. I'd much prefer if the screen was down here, so it's a bit closer. Now you have wide Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is nice. However, when you stick it into reverse and you activate your rear camera, you'll also notice that it's pretty poor in quality. And I think for such a critical feature like that, it should have had an upgrade years ago. There are some aspects of it that I do like though. For example, I really like that we've got the physical climate controls down here. They're nice and out of the way. They're very easy to use. I also really like this door handle here, which kind of feels a bit like an aeroplane joystick here with its mirror adjustment. Just a small thing, but I think pretty cool nonetheless. As far as what's missing in here, it would have been better to see dual zone climate control to settle those partner disputes. It also would have been great to see a phone charger, a wireless phone charger, or even a digital driver's display. It's not exactly a hill I'll die on. However, the small one that Mitsubishi has fitted between the two analog gauges here doesn't actually give you the ability to see your exact speed. And I found that to be a little bit of a hindrance this week when driving around, because I don't really know exactly the kind of speed I'm doing, and when you're going past speed cameras and things like that, it's nice to know the exact digit you're supposed to be sitting on. Anyway, that's enough for the front. Let's jump in the back. In the back seat now, and I think this is one area where the Eclipse Cross does pull a little bit of an advantage. That's because there's a good amount of room back here. Look, I've got heaps of room in front of my knees here, even though I'm sitting behind my own driving position, and my legs are pretty well supported. You know, they're still sitting a little bit high and dry, but nothing too tragic. I will note though that my headroom is probably not quite ideal. My head's almost touching the ceiling, or my hair is touching the ceiling, and that's due to the sloping rear angle of the roof. So we've got to have some negatives in that respect. One big negative though, I think, is the lack of rear air vents back here. It's a bit of a cost-cutting measure, and it's something that I really don't like to see, because I think it limits usability for people who are a little bit more car sick when they sit in the back seats, and that's especially given the fact that visibility, while certainly not terrible, nothing approaching something like a Toyota CHR, isn't the best in the biz back here. The window line is pretty high, and this pillar is pretty close to me, so I can't see all that much, even though I can sort of see over the driver a little bit. As far as the seats themselves, look, they're pretty flat, and they're pretty basic. One surprisingly annoying thing about this arrangement though is, even though the middle seat is fairly wide, enough to accommodate an adult, I think, it sits pretty high, and the seat itself is also pretty firm, which does limit its usability over those long trips. I would not be happy if I was sitting in that seat. In terms of materials, look, back here we have it reverts to some scratchy materials up here, which isn't the nicest. And you also don't have that nice plushy armrest that we do in the front, which is a little bit of a bummer. In terms of other amenities, look, we've got a flip down armrest here, which is nice and convenient. We've also got a pretty small bottle holder in the door. That's certainly not going to fit my bottle. And we have a USB-A, and I think the only USB-C port in this car, which is strange that it's here and not in the front. But anyway, it's nice to see it there. But yeah, that's pretty much all for now. So as the resident family man of the Chasing Cars Garage, I've been using this one this week to ferry my kid to and from childcare, and I've been pretty pleased with what I've found. First of all, the door opens to a reasonably wide angle, not the widest in the biz, but still pretty good, and the actual distance between the front and the rear seat is actually pretty good. I haven't had to move the front passenger seat forward much at all to get a rearwards facing baby seat in. Of course, you've got your standard 2 ISOFIX points on either side of the seat, and you've got the 3 top tethers through the back there. So all in all, pretty good for baby seats. Coming around to the boot now, we open up the manual tailgate, which is pretty light, so it's not too much of a bother, to reveal a 405 litre boot, which is pretty decent for this class. It expands to nearly 1200 litres once you put the back seats down. Now, I don't think that boot literage figure is entirely representative of how useful the shape is, because of course, when we do see this deep sloped angle on some SUVs, it means that you do just have an inherently less useful boot, but the way it sort of pops out, it does allow you to have a number of tall items here without it being too much of a hindrance. It's also a pretty deep boot. I've had my pram in here a few times this week, and although it isn't the biggest pram in the world, I've still had about yay amount of room left over once it slid all the way to the back. Now, we do have an extra protective cover in here, which I personally really love, but once we lift it up here, we do reveal that it has a space saver spare, which is a real great extra for this one if you do want to go country and areas just outside of the city centre. As far as other amenities, well, there's not really a whole lot. You have the cargo blind here, and Mitsubishi does give you some other options to mount it further down here, so I suppose you can get some taller items in. Not really ideal, but it's certainly better than no options at all. We also have 4 tie-down points, 1 at each corner of the boot. No 12-volt here back here, unfortunately. You do get it on the plug-in hybrid variant, but usually even on combustion variants, it's the sort of thing we're pretty used to seeing in the boot area. Right, that's enough of the boot. Let's go for a drive. Now, getting behind the wheel of a small SUV, I always do find to be a generally enjoyable activity, as they're kind of small, kind of fun. They're a little bit like a hatchback, they're just pumped up a little bit by definition, and sometimes often literally. And you know, in some ways that has been the case in the Eclipse Cross. However, in general, I have not been all that thrilled with the driving experience. Starting with the good bits, look, the 1.5 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine in the Eclipse Cross is actually a good little unit. Makes 110 kilowatts of power and 250 newton meters of torque, which is around about what we're seeing from the German rivals and Skoda and other brands like that. These small displacement turbocharged engines are quite good. And I also think that plays into its CVT transmission. Normally, I'm not always a big fan of CVTs because they just make a lot of noise. However, paired to this turbocharged engine, which is naturally a little more hushed, and because it has that 250 newton meters of torque to tap into from a very low base in the rev range, it essentially just means you have a quiet car that doesn't seem like it's struggling all the time. Now, the LS is available in front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, but the Black Edition is just a front-wheel drive proposition. I don't really think that's the end of the world. I think an SUV like this one, which is more designed for the cities, is perfectly fine being front-wheel drive, and you do have 180 mils of ground clearance if you want to go on some hiking trails or something like that. Now, as I said before, this does sit on the larger side of small SUVs, so I did want to put it to the test going to some tight car parks to see if it would be more difficult to thread around. And well, I can confirm this does feel like a larger car to drive than some of its smaller rivals out there, like, you know, the microscopic Mazda CX-30, for example. It still feels reasonably wieldy, and the good visibility out does help that quite a lot, and especially these huge mirrors that it has. Now, within those city areas, of course, the roads are absolutely rubbish, so I got plenty of testing to find out what the suspension on this thing was like. And while I'm not going to say that it's an uncomfortable vehicle, although there are definitely some uncomfortable moments, the suspension is never really settled. When you're driving down the road, it's kind of always doing something, it's bouncing to and from, and there were some bumps that I went over and it just kind of sprung over, it just overreacted to what it needed to do, and it kind of left me wondering, you know, that perhaps this needed a bit more work in terms of the suspension. It's just not as settled as some rivals, and when the car is always doing something, it's not very relaxing to drive. Now, some of you will know that the Eclipse used to be a two-door sports car, a rather cool two-door sports car, actually. However, I can't say any of that dynamic talent has filtered down to the Eclipse Cross. It's really a rather uninspiring vehicle to drive. The steering is ponderous and vague, and the chassis itself just really doesn't seem all that interested in threading through a corner in any kind of elegant manner. It seems to be quite easily upset from mid-corner bumps, and overall it just doesn't feel very comfortable going around a corner at a moderate speed. So you do have to slow down, and it also plays into what I was saying before. This car just doesn't feel relaxed when it's driving, and that's a little bit disappointing because there are some small SUVs out there which are really quite fun to drive, and it's a shame that Mitsubishi wasn't able to tap into that when it was building upon this chassis. As far as safety, look, it's definitely a mixed bag here. We have some good tech, like we've got forwards AEB with pedestrian detection, which is lovely for those city areas. And Mitsubishi has recently bolstered that safety equipment by adding blind spot monitoring, lane change assist, and rear cross traffic alert. Now, this is based on one of the more affordable grades in the Eclipse Cross lineup, which means it unfortunately does miss out on some things, and some things I think it shouldn't. So we don't have a 360 camera, which isn't the end of the world in my opinion. However, we do miss out on adaptive cruise control. We've only got basic cruise control here. It is available in the Aspire grade and up, and I think we're getting to a point where adaptive cruise control really is becoming the norm, and it would be great to see that filter down through those lower grades. Now, the Eclipse Cross does have a 5-star ANCAP rating. However, it was tested back in 2017, meaning that as of December this year, it's going to expire officially, at which point it will be considered unrated. Now, Mitsubishi could go and retest this car and it could pass with flying colors. However, I don't think that's going to happen simply because there are a number of features that newer competitors are bringing to the table, which I'm not sure that you can retrofit to an older car like this one. For example, a front center airbag, which is really great to stop the front two passengers clashing together. However, I'd love to be proven wrong, and I really hope that that safety rating continues, but for now, it has had its death date set. During our week of testing, we've seen an average of 8.2 litres per 100 Ks of fuel used, and that's a little bit above Mitsubishi's claim of 7.3 litres per 100 Ks. And while that's not great for a small SUV, it's a bit more respectable when you consider the extra practicality this car has and the fact that it uses the cheap and nasty 91 octane fuel. Now, of course, Mitsubishi does offer a plug-in hybrid variant of this car. However, it does cost a little bit extra. We're talking 47 grand before the government gets involved and taxes you accordingly. Now, Mitsubishi claims that that variant will give you 54 Ks of all-electric driving range. However, that is the ES variant, and that's not quite as nice as this one in terms of specification. Now, being a Mitsubishi, you get a pretty fantastic warranty on this one. It can go up to 10 years or 200,000 Ks. However, that's on the condition that you stick with Mitsubishi dealerships when you're getting this one serviced. Now, Mitsubishi offers capped price servicing for up to 10 years at 150,000 Ks. However, looking at 5 years and 75,000 kilometers, you're looking at paying $1,895. Service intervals on this one are every 12 months or 15,000 kilometers. Now, in terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,090 to comprehensively insure a new Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross. Of course, everyone's situation is different and the premium will vary according to make, model, and other things insurers take into account, such as your postcode, driving history, who drives the car, and where you garage the car. Often when we're reviewing cars, we find that the best value of the range can be found just one or two rungs off the bottom of the ladder, and that's definitely the case here for the Eclipse Cross and the LS Black Edition. For an extra $1,250, you really do get a number of nice upgrades that make this car much nicer to live with every day. But after recently spending 6 months in Mitsubishi's much newer Outlander model, I can't help but feel how dated this car is starting to become. From its cabin design that seemingly integrated technology as a bit of a last-minute request, through to its lackluster driving dynamics, which really aren't very inspiring or very fun at all. As a result, even with its enticing price point, it's hard to recommend the Eclipse Cross over its simply more accomplished rivals, such as the Skoda Kamiq or Mazda CX-30. Now, we don't know if there's going to be a second generation of the Eclipse Cross, but it certainly seems like it's time for one. We do know that Mitsubishi has a new small SUV in the works, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what that model can bring to the market. However, those are just my thoughts, and I'm keen to hear what you think about this car. Do you own one? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe, but for now, that's all. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.